Based on the recent statement of North Korea, I have decided to terminate the planned summit in Singapore on June 12th.
It feels to me like a reality show. It feels to me like one day it's very dramatic in this direction, another day in this direction.
I think North Korea was quite surprised that President Trump was willing to walk away.
Number one, I was not surprised. Number two, I thought it was a brilliant tactical move. And it's all about game theory. That's what I thought.
Maybe they enjoy this type of theatrics, this type of bravado, this type of me first diplomacy.
This is obviously a huge historic moment. Watching Kim Jong-un approach the border and Moon Jae-in approach the border, and in that moment where they shook hands, it was emotional because this is something that they could never have imagined, especially just a few months ago. So the atmosphere is one of what could happen next. Are we expecting any surprises?
At this very moment, Secretary Pompeo is on his way to North Korea in preparation for my upcoming meeting with Kim Jong-un.
마이크 폼페오 국무장관은 김정은 동지께 도널드 트럼프 미 합중국 대통령의 구두 메시지를 정중히 전달해 드렸습니다.
Flying back are three what they were calling hostages. We call them fine people, three really fine people. Seem to be healthy.
The three U.S. detainees that were released by North Korea have landed back on American soil.
It's a dream to be home. Those were the words uttered by one of the three Americans who were back on U.S. soil following their release from North Korea. Meeting them off the plane in the middle of the night was President Trump.
I recognize that for South Korea and media in South Korea, this can only be the biggest story. Every time. These are your neighbors, and yet this is your family. This is personal. You share the same blood. You share the same personal triumphs and tragedies. There is so much heart and emotion to this story.
People in Singapore weren't surprised. Singapore has long been known as a safe and hospitable place for different parties to meet and have a constructive conversation. There's an annual meeting the first weekend in June called the Shangri-La Dialogue, in which defense ministers from all over the world convene on Singapore and meet, and it's safe, and Singapore is neutral when it comes to sort of taking sides. So it's a peaceful and safe place to convene. So it made sense to Singaporeans that Trump and Kim would think about meeting in Singapore.
North Korea wanted to get the U.S. attention because of the harsh rhetoric being used by U.S. officials like National Security Advisor John Bolton, who was demanding a Libya-style complete denuclearization with very little room for negotiation and compromise. And so rather than lash out against the U.S. in any way, apart from criticizing, they took measures to demonstrate their disapproval against South Korea, which included criticizing not only the joint drills, but also holding back on allowing South Korean journalists to go cover the test site closure.
우리 공화국을 반대하는 대규모의 연합 공중 훈련을 벌려놓음으로써 지금까지 우리가 보여준 평화예어적인 모든 노력과 선의에 무리무도한 도발로 대답해 나섰으며.
There's a bit of an issue there because those exercises didn't normally include nuclear-capable missiles and bombers, right? So the B-52s that were included at the last minute, that made the exercise slightly unusual in the grand scheme of things, and that seems to me like a deliberate move by the United States and South Korea to sort of see how far they could push things. And clearly North Korea reacted to that and said, look, if you're not going to keep your side of the bargain, we're not going to keep ours either. But also it's a very convenient excuse for them, right? To just go out there and say, look, we can play hardball too.
At first, they were okay with Max Thunder, or, you know, Max Thunder had been telegraphed, there was a media day for it, and North Korea didn't complain. And it wasn't until Max Thunder was sort of already going and had already started that North Korea started complaining about it. I would guess this is kind of typical pre-negotiation. It's kind of power plays and politics ahead of the summit.
힘을 통한 평화라는 트럼프 대통령님의 강력한 비전과 리더십 덕분에 사상 최초의 북미 정상회담이 열리게 되었고 한반도의 완전한 비핵화와 세계 평화라는 꿈에 성큼 다가설 수 있게 되었습니다.
I see two Koreas, and then ultimately maybe someday in the future, wouldn't be now, but someday in the future, maybe they'll get together and you'll go back to one Korea. And that would be okay with me too, as long as they both.
North Korea did not keep its promise to allow in actual nuclear experts to observe what was happening at Punggye-ri on the 24th. Only journalists, and the journalists didn't get to monitor radiation levels in the area either because they got their detectors taken away from them. So, no, they didn't keep their promise when it comes to full transparency on it.
갱도 안에 여러 곳에 폭약을 설치해서 갱도 안을 우선 폭파하고 입구를 완전히 허물어 버리는 방법으로.
We don't know because there's no outside verification. International experts who have been observing, I think, satellite footage and photos of the site are saying that while entrances were destroyed, that it is likely that these tunnels could be reopened pretty soon if North Korea wanted to restart that program.
This will only end like the Libyan model ended if Kim Jong-un doesn't make a deal. I mean, President Trump made it clear the United States of America, under his leadership, is not going to tolerate the regime in North Korea possessing nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles that threaten the United States and our allies.
I've decided to terminate the planned summit in Singapore on June 12th. I believe that this is a tremendous setback for North Korea and indeed a setback for the world.
It's always very difficult to tell how these decisions are made. So Donald Trump could say, look, they're being hostile, they've been aggressive, they've insulted my vice president. That's not really something you should do in a diplomatic process of negotiation. But also he might have had other reasons, right? There might have been things happening behind the scenes that we don't know about. There might have been his advisors saying things that we don't know they said. So it's impossible to say whether it was really just those remarks on their own terms or whether there was something else there.
I was pretty angry. It is very difficult to plan a summer vacation or any kind of personal activities when you have to check the Twitter every couple of hours and you don't know what to expect.
Too much this afternoon because this is also the final day for our vascular journalism courses. We're finishing all the final product.
North Korea is not just one story, it is a whole country. There's a political story, there's a geopolitical story there.
Do you think this is actually Trump not wanting to lose face? So he comes up first to say, I call it off. We have to be very careful with what comes out.
Most of our audience, of course, are working journalists, so we're all trying to figure out how do we cover what's happening on the Korean Peninsula. I think the reality is that it has a lot of effect because it is an international story. Obviously the U.S. is a big player in that, as well as the two Koreas, and you've got China, you've got Japan in that mix as well. And it was really interesting to hear from reporters from the Wall Street Journal, for example, from NPR, who are covering the story on the ground in Seoul, but who obviously have a very international perspective.
All very intentional. For an example,
so going into yesterday was Thursday, so going into yesterday what we were expecting was to find out or see images eventually of North Korea's destruction of Punggye-ri, which is the site of the 6 underground nuclear tests that have happened. This was largely considered a show, and so that was going to be the big story of the day, and we were watching for that. But a few hours later, Trump decided to back out in the form of the letter that all of you have probably seen. So that was yesterday. Sure.
It does feel like we're on a roller coaster. It does feel like we just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I think certain people may very well find it exciting. They may find it, gosh, after all these years, after all these decades, we may have something really amazing. We may have some breakthrough. We may have something historic. On the other hand, we could have a catastrophe. We could have a disaster. We could have just a nuclear showdown.
Even though Donald Trump sent a letter on Twitter that basically said the meeting is off, there is plenty of room, perhaps, for one of them to come back eventually. I think this is not the end of the conversation.
Sometimes in communication, it's not necessarily what you say, it's also what you do. These two have been so far apart. There needs to be agitation before they come together. You have to sometimes lead the horse to water. It all sets up a foundation of leverage. Who's got more leverage? Who can put a better face on it? What is the language that is being used that will get people there? You can't say, these have been my enemy for generations and suddenly be friends, and vice versa. So I think it was a very interesting tactical move, because if Trump didn't do it first, I really would not have been surprised if North Korea did it.
I think President Trump operates in a way that keeps people off guard. He's full of surprises, can't be predicted, and I think he prides himself on that. And my immediate reaction was, I bet this could be easily rescheduled.
북한이 정말로 핵 포기를 하겠느냐 의심스럽다. 시간 벌기 아니냐. 결국은 이렇게 하다가 미사일의 재진입 기술을 확보하면서 다시 핵 위기가 발생하지 않겠느냐.
国連制裁を国連賛同した中国やロシアも入れながらですね、そこをしっかりと
is a big change and a series of changing in the climate between two countries, and both are Japan's neighboring countries. The vast majority of the Japanese people are very much interested in that. However, so the latest news from both Washington D.C. and Pyongyang cast getting back to the previous situation.
Generally, at least the official position of Japan has been, that they hope the summit is held, that does come back on the table. I mean, as I'm sure you're aware, Japan has been more hardline than Korea on this whole issue. But I think they realize that in that sense, Moon is driving the process more than Japan is driving the process, right? And is obviously allied very closely with the U.S. And is supportive of whatever needs to be supportive of whatever the U.S. does on this front.
And I compare a lot about how Japanese media cover this topic versus Western media covers this topic. And then two things that Japanese media, in my opinion, are obsessed is number one, is Abe excluded from the conversation? So in other words, Japanese media obviously cares about Japanese government, and it seems that summit sort of gave the Japanese people the impression that, well, now North and South can solve this nuclear issue by themselves. Maybe US is included, but is Japan included? Are we still part of the conversation? That concern is visible in media coverage. And second is the issues of Japanese people who got kidnapped by North Korea. And that problem hasn't been solved, but it seems at the time, at least, that things are moving towards more peaceful conciliation between North and South. And Japanese media are worried about this issue being neglected. So those are the two things that I observed.
North Korean response overnight or after Trump's comment was relatively mild and even kind of reaching back out to the U.S. And then the latest report is the U.S. Trump himself has said, well, it was a good response and we're still working on things. So I think the general feeling is that both sides would like to hold this summit if they can hold it on the terms that they're both happy with, right? And it's always difficult to set up a meeting, I think, between the leaders of any two countries. It takes, months of preparations, and this is a particularly difficult one because both countries aren't used to dealing with each other, I think, in this kind of way. But I do think that they both want to do this if they can make it happen.
판문점 북측 지역 통일각에서 김정은 국무위원장과 두 번째 남북 정상회담을 가졌습니다.
What I like about the second inter-Korean summit is that it's rather a marvel that Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in, countries that don't technically even recognize each other as legitimate states, can just call each other up and say, hey, let's meet. And that's what happened. And it was really a surprise in that sense, right?
우리 두 정상은 6월 12일 북미 정상회담이 성공적으로 이루어져야 하며 한반도의 비핵화와 항구적인 평화 체제를 위한 우리의 여정은 결코 중단될 수 없다는 점을 확인하고.
I think Kim Jong-un was surprised by Trump's cancellation and the fact that he initiated this inter-Korean summit. I think that is significant. Most of the speculation is that he wanted to get the summit back on track, and the two leaders, when they got together, this was the essence of the conversation. How do we get this diplomatic momentum back moving forward? And I think that President Moon tried to reassure him and tried to get the kind of commitment again towards denuclearization that would reassure President Trump and get this summit back on track.
he was worried that it wasn't going to go ahead because that might presumably spell a return to more aggressive military posturing, abandoning the diplomatic process that he initiated earlier this year. So yeah, I think he did feel the heat, and I think he also thought that going to South Korea and going through that inter-Korean channel, which had worked really well the month before, was probably going to be the way to do it. And as we've seen, it worked. So that calculation paid off.
A lot of people are working on it. It's moving along very nicely. So we're looking at June 12th in Singapore. That hasn't changed.
We're always going to be prepared, and if the meeting takes place on June 12th, we'll be ready.
That's usual give and take, you know, of trying to put together big summits and stuff. So diplomats are still at work.
Meanwhile, North Korea and the U.S. appear to be back at work making preparations for their summit.
Already a number of working-level talks are held between the two sides.
The simultaneous negotiations were happening because on one track there was logistical conversation. So where is the hotel where the summit will take place? Where is the president going to stay? Where is Kim Jong-un going to stay? How is transportation going to work? That was one bucket of conversations going on. The other bucket of conversations going on was what is the final work product of a head of states level summit? What we usually see in diplomacy is that working level diplomats agree in advance before the heads of states sit down and meet. And so there is not a lot of time for that. Typically these happen over the course of months. So there's a lot of rush diplomacy on the substance part of June 12th.
We're meeting with the chairman on June 12th. A letter was given to me by Kim Jong-un, and that letter was a very nice letter. Oh, would you like to see what was in that letter? Would you like? How much? How much? How much? Tremendous success. Tremendously successful.
여기까지 오는 길이 그리 쉬운 길은 아니에요. 역사적인 이 만남에서 지난 과거를 덮고 새로운 출발을 알리는 그 역사적인 문건에 서명을 하게 됩니다.
Starting that process very quickly. Very, very quickly. Absolutely.
Will the summit change anything? I hope so. For the sake of both Koreas. For the sake of reuniting families. For the sake of human rights in North Korea. For the sake of peace.
지구상의 마지막 냉전을 해체한 세계사적 사건으로 기록될 것입니다. 미국과 남북한이 함께 거둔 위대한 승리이고 평화를 염원하는 세계인들의 진보입니다.
Whether anybody disagrees or agrees with the Trump administration, likes or dislikes, objectively you could say that this experience with the U.S. is unlike any experience North Korea has ever had. In that, it could be very interesting.